Well, good afternoon to everybody. I hope everybody's having a good day. I see our numbers have kind of quit climbing at this point, although we anticipate probably more to join. We have quite a few people interested. You'd think we'd be talking about a topic that is important to school board members based on the numbers we have compared to recent ones. You have myself and Brad Banasic, our legal counsel, on to have conversations with you. I also want to say a couple of things. Make sure that you mute your mic unless at some point we're recognizing you to ask a question. That'll just make it easier for everybody to hear. Post questions in the chat as you have them. Eric, a little levity is good to bring to a meeting. I can appreciate that. Just want to, as we have with all of these webinars throughout the year, this is an opportunity that, Brad and I are going to do a little bit of sharing of some thoughts, guidance from a legal perspective and kind of messaging perspective. But this is also an opportunity for you to share with each other how you're handling situations within your district, particularly today, as it relates to the conversations on critical race theory. I've seen some good things from districts that they're sharing with their constituencies and with people that attend board meetings. And we just thought, this is an issue that's getting a lot of play in the media. It's getting a lot of play at the district level. It's a tough, topic depending on the district that you're in. And want to just have an opportunity to kind of share our thoughts about it. And one thing I want to start with, as you're all aware, you all received an email from me now maybe 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago, critical race theory tips and talking points for school districts and definitions. I will say we did that communication. We did one a little bit earlier, maybe 3 weeks or 4 weeks before that. In both of those, I want to say that I tried very diligently to not espouse a position on critical race theory, but to try to give information to school board members and superintendents on what the issue was going on in districts. I received a number of calls from superintendents and board members to say, we could use some assistance just with how to handle the crowds, how to deal with meetings that become unruly, how to have a conversation about the topic without trying to escalate feelings within the room. And that was really my intent in trying to pass those things along. But I will say, and I've got many, thank yous from members for putting that information out. But I also got comments from members reading those documents and saying, I'm surprised that MASB supports critical race theory. And I've tried to respond individually to any member that have passed along sentiments like that to say what I just did, which is that was not our intent. In fact, I would say that as an organization and as an individual, critical race theory to me is not a K-12 issue. It is historically an issue that is at the collegiate level, doctoral and level or legal level going to law school. And even there, it's not necessarily widespread across universities that are all going into this space. And so we don't have a formal position on CRT in Michigan. And part of that to me is if MASB as a K-12 institution takes a position on critical race theory, it makes it a K-12 issue. I don't believe it is. I don't believe that it necessarily has a specific place in the K-12 environment. I know that it is not a curriculum. It's not really a teachable subject in the K-12 space. And so our efforts here are really to help you as board members and SUPs just navigate what's going on in your districts as these questions come up. It is not to support or oppose anything in this space. It really is to support all of you in saying, hey, how do we answer this? I don't believe, to my knowledge, that there's any district in Michigan that is teaching critical race theory as it's laid out as a theory that's now 40 years old. And, I can talk with great confidence in that space to say, that's why we haven't weighed in and taken a position, because we just don't believe it's something in our schools And why we weighed in to help all of you and to give you definitions and other things is simply because of that, right? Like, why should you be disrupted as a board and as a governance leadership team with your superintendent as you try to get kids back to school? And now all of your focus at a board meeting tends to revolve in this space, and you're not able to spend as much time as you should talking about what do you need to do to reopen your schools and be safe? What kind of offerings are you putting forth to your students? Hybrid, non-hybrid, virtual for those that want it. Like, those are the conversations you should be engaging in right now. Yes, with the growing numbers and the Delta variant, maybe even having conversations about masks and not masks and what grade level. To me, critical race theory just is taking away from the focus that you all should have at the school district level. And so I just want to kind of start with that preface, because MASB is, as I said, not a proponent or opponent. And I think even the school districts, all of you should be in that same space. It's not about debating CRT. It is, in essence, sharing your story with what you're doing. Now, I do think people are confusing, maybe on purpose, maybe on accident, work that you might be doing in your district or that you've been doing for years in your district regarding equity with critical race theory. And while there is a component of critical race theory that deals with equity, it is not the underlying kind of premise of critical race theory. And as an organization, we are encouraging districts to continue that work in equity. And I did have a call 2 weeks ago asking how would we describe critical race theory, and I'm sorry, how would we define equity work from an association standpoint? And I think each district has to come up with their own definition. But from our perspective, it is you as school districts looking at the data that exists in your district, and that data comes from a lot of subset. It might be testing data, it might be expulsion data, it might be student engagement questions from a survey that you have. Looking at that data as a school district, the governance team and the superintendent and the board, and saying, we have a group of students or multiple groups of students that somehow are not at the same level as our higher achieving students. That could be based on poverty, that could be based on race, that could be based on educational ability. There's a myriad of things that would put kids in that space of not being able to achieve at a certain level. And then the school district making a decision to say what programs and what resources need to be put in place to move those kids over the time that they are in our school district, so that when they leave our school district, that we at least you've made all of the attempts that you can to have them all achieving at an equitable level. And it might be looking at your systems as a school district and saying, is there something we're doing as a school district that's impairing these kids from learning? To me, that's the equity conversation you're having. I think that's how a lot of school districts approach it. But that was kind of my answer to the individual member that had a conversation about that. You've also seen recently the Michigan Department of Education, particularly Superintendent Rice, in Bridge Magazine, just wrote a piece about talking about American history and all of American history. I'd encourage you to take a look at that. It is the view from Dr. Rice, who I hold in high regard. And that, again, is also different than critical race theory. So I just wanted to bring those things up. I do want to touch a little bit before I have Brad talk about kind of the meeting side of this. In the talking points piece that we sent out to you, Laura, and you asked, and maybe Stacy, you can, Bridge Magazine just carried the article from Dr. Rice. What we put out in the talking points, it really is about, I think the space for districts to kind of move this conversation forward is first being willing to listen. Parents and citizens that are showing up at your board meetings have a right to be there. They have a right to address the board and bring things forward. You have to, as a board, I think, and as a governance team, be listeners. Don't be judging. Try to, whether it be if you're in person or on Zoom, there is a neutrality to listening, right? You are not giving facial expressions. You are listening and trying to put yourself in their shoes and figure out why they have the concern that they have. It is not about engaging necessarily in a back and forth in that space, but it is about listening. And then it is about being transparent as a district. It is about here, and I'm going to guess most of you will say to people that are bringing up CRT, it is not something we're teaching or training on. And then the next step is to say, but here's what we are doing to help all of our kids. And it is a space for you to open up the conversation about work that you might be doing in the equity space or the inclusion space and how you go about that business. If you are not transparent, if you're not sharing with your parents what they're doing and the only voice they're hearing is Facebook or newspaper coverage about your last board meeting, those parents are going to take that as what's going on because the district hasn't put out information. Now, this is only my take on this. I had a conversation with a group of superintendents last week about the kind of pros and cons of doing a written statement. If you are a district that has not had anybody show up to your board meetings and bring this issue up, you have to judge what makes sense in your community. But if you see that you are a district that either you're going to presume that it's going to happen sooner rather than later, to me, it makes sense to get out in front of it. You are preparing right now to go back to school. You may address it head on and say, we have seen many districts that are talking about critical race theory. The citizens have shown up at their meetings, and we want to be proactive as a school district and share what we think about this issue and where we are as a district. Our hope in giving you that advice is that maybe it may not preempt individuals that are maybe having an ulterior motive for bringing this forward, but for a lot of your voters, a lot of your parents, a lot of your taxpayers, they trust the board, they trust the superintendent. And if you say that you're not doing something and you explain what you're doing, they're going to feel good about that. And in that case, you may still get a segment that shows up at your board meeting, but for most, they're going to feel good that you've addressed the situation in a public manner. And so we would encourage you to have those conversations at the district level and decide, like, do we want to be proactive and get this out before? On the flip side, by sending something out, some would argue you're inviting a controversy that doesn't exist in your district. So I think you have to handle it in whichever way you think is appropriate. You understand your community better than we do. But it is one of those situations where, at least from our perspective, and it's the way that I've represented MASB for a long time, it's the way that I used to lobby and deal with the media. I always feel getting out in front of an issue, sharing what you're doing, differentiating between maybe what people or other school districts are being accused of and what's actually happening in your district can have some real benefit. And so that would be one piece of guidance. And it's staying on message, right? You are trying the best that you can for the students in your district, and any time spent away from that can really detract from the message. So I'm just trying to give some general thoughts in the space. I'm not going to go through the whole document. You can read it. If you have clarifying questions about that, please, you can talk about them today. You can send them to me. But as we move forward and we find other resources, I had a school district actually share a document that they're sharing right now with their staff, just to help kind of direct their teachers on how to deal with this. It was a nice one pager. I didn't get permission to share it yet, so I'm not going down that road and sharing it with you. But I would encourage districts to think about that too, because your staff is also your audience. And if your staff doesn't know where you are as a superintendent and a board, they also have to presume openly. And so I think it can be of great assistance for you to share what you think is appropriate messaging with your staff, so that you're all coming from the same place. Staff, board, superintendent, all speaking from the same talking points, all focusing on the same thing. What work are you doing and what work are you not involved in? And that can have some benefit. I'd like Brad to have an opportunity here now to talk a little bit about kind of the meeting space. I know he's received questions about public comment period. If you're on Zoom, do you have to broadcast it? Like all of those kind of questions. So Brad, if you'd like to do just a quick rundown on where do boards stand on public comment period and kind of the disruption that happens in this. We've heard a number of districts have had to recess meetings because they can't get a meeting back under control. I think if you could just address that from a overall perspective, that would be useful for the group.
Sure, thanks, Dan, and thanks to everyone for attending our Members Matter webinar today. Great turnout. So when you look at the Open Meetings Act and the provision on public participation, very, very brief. Essentially says at every public meeting, members of the public shall have the opportunity to address the board. So what the legislature has done, with that type of statement and requirement in the Open Meetings Act is create a limited public forum under the First Amendment. So, not only do you have to worry about complying with the Open Meetings Act requirement of allowing for that public comment, you have to consider the First Amendment as well within the context of a limited public forum. So there's a balancing act, and so you're balancing the right of a school board to conduct a business meeting in an orderly fashion against the right that individuals have under the First Amendment, under the Open Meetings Act as well. So it can be a difficult balance at times, and you've seen how difficult that can be with articles you read in the newspaper and lawsuits being filed. So yeah, what I want to do today is just kind of give you a brief overview of rules that may be adopted by a board to facilitate public comment and have an orderly business meeting, at the same time ensuring that you're giving your community members the right under the Open Meetings Act to address the board, and you're preserving their First Amendment rights as well. First and foremost, if the one rule that you leave today, that you remember, that every public comment rule you wish to enforce has to be adopted by the board, okay? Number one rule, if you're going to have a public comment rule and you're going to enforce that rule, whether it's a rule for limiting individuals to 3 minutes or 5 minutes, it has to be adopted by the board. You should not be enforcing any type of public comment rule that has not been approved by the board, because recording the rule is an essential element under the Open Meetings Act. You have to have that rule recorded. And the Attorney General has established a standard for rules that are in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. Every public comment rule that you adopt should be reasonable, flexible, and written in a way that encourages public participation. Okay, so keep that standard in mind with all of your public comment rules that you adopt as a board. Reasonable, flexible, and written in a way that encourages public comment. Now, as I mentioned, you can adopt a rule for individual comment, right? Many boards have adopted 3, maybe up to 5 minutes for individual comment. I've never been a proponent of going below 3 minutes for individual comment. And then once you adopt that rule, you ensure that it's enforced consistently, okay? I know it may seem hard at times to cut someone off at 3 minutes, but you have to, because if you allow one person to go, 3:30, and then you cut the next person off at 3, they're going to claim you discriminated against me based on my viewpoint, okay? The person that was given 3.5 minutes had a positive viewpoint and was supporting what the board was doing. My viewpoint was negative, and I was, questioning what the board was doing, and I got cut off right at 3 minutes. And they could claim that that is a rule that's enforced in violation of their First Amendment rights based upon violating their viewpoint perspective. So enforce that individual comment rule consistently. Now, we've also heard that a lot of folks coming to board meetings don't live in your communities. So through social networking, people are recruiting different individuals to come to school board meetings, whether it be in protest or to comment on an issue. Those folks have a right to attend your meetings as well as comment to the board. The next question is, do you have the ability to request information from those individuals? You can request it, okay? I would not mandate providing information about where they reside or any contact information. That may be requested, and the request, again, should be memorialized in one of your public comment rules, but someone should not be denied the opportunity to address the board because they're not giving you information about where they reside or any information about how he or she may be contacted, for following up on their communication. Public comment does not require the board to respond. Okay? There's nothing in the Open Meetings Act that says the board must respond to any comments made to the board. Now, if someone is going to respond, it's likely going to be your board president. Okay, I think it would create a difficult situation if you had 7 different opinions, 7 different board members responding to comments from the public. So most of you have board policies that indicate the board president is the spokesperson for the board, and that person should be responding if a comment merits a response. But in most cases, there should be consultation with the administration, maybe after a meeting, to determine whether a response is permitted or a response is merited. And then maybe that response could be provided to a specific individual after the meeting, or brought back at a meeting after that particular meeting where the comments were made. So, but again, no rule requiring a response. Now, Don mentioned another issue we've been getting questions on is the issue of streaming meetings and allowing individuals to publicly comment via virtual means. Now, there isn't any guidance, restrictions, prohibitions against a board streaming its board meeting one way. Okay, I know a lot of boards do that. I don't have any issue with that. If your board feels that that's a great way to communicate with your community, I would endorse and support that. What I'm a little uncomfortable with, though, is if you're having a traditional in-person meeting, would be allowing individuals to publicly comment to the board via virtual means when you're having a traditional in-person meeting. Because under a traditional in-person meeting, you're not complying with Section 3A of the Open Meetings Act. Section 3A of the Open Meetings Act is the new section that was added to address virtual meetings in whole or in part, and it includes very, very specific, detailed regulations and rules for public comment in the virtual space. But if it's a traditional in-person meeting, you're not following those rules. So we don't really know what the rules would be for a traditional in-person meeting when you're allowing public comment to be done by virtual means. So from a best practice standpoint, I'm recommending to our members, if you're not following Section 3A of the Open Meetings Act when you're conducting a virtual meeting in whole or in part, MASB recommends as a best practice that if someone wishes to address the board, they have to be there in person, even if you're streaming that meeting one way. So those are a couple issues I just wanted to throw out there, Don. I know I don't take up too much time with that. I know this is supposed to be a forum where board members share, but I'd be happy to answer any questions on public comment on issues that I didn't address.
Brad, we have a question in the chat. Should you provide a brief tutorial regarding the rules of public comments before the meeting so that everyone understands what they are?
I think a review would not be a bad idea, as long as it's not too lengthy. But if you feel that that would be in the best interest of having an orderly public comment and an orderly business meeting, yeah, I would support that.
I'll post one that hasn't been posted yet. I just was reading an article about one of our members that seems to be kind of mired in controversy that's moved beyond even critical race theory. When, sometimes you get a board that tries to be understanding of a situation. And so all of a sudden they're like, oh, we'll let you go beyond your 3 or 5 minutes because you're, we don't want to interrupt you, or like you're wrapping up your thought. Or we'll let you talk in our second open comment period if they have one as a board. Would you encourage them to be like, this is the way we're going to do it and we're going to require everybody to end? Or are you okay with that flexibility, or does that open up a problem? Now you've let somebody do it, and now how do you tell the next person they can't?
Yeah, I like consistency, Don, and you set the rules, apply them with consistency, and that way you don't have any claims of discriminating against someone's viewpoint or treating someone differently, based upon the message that they're expressing to the board. You can offer 2 opportunities for public comment. Some boards do that. I would say maybe 50% of our boards may have 2 opportunities for public comment. Again, that's not a requirement under the Open Meetings Act. Open Meetings Act allows just for 1 public comment opportunity. And, most boards have that right at the beginning of the meeting. And you could put a time frame on that first public comment, but what you would have to do though is, after you've exceeded that time frame, go on to your other action items, and then so you're tabling public comment, and then take public comment off the table at the end of the meeting, and then pick it up from there. And then if you still have a number of folks wishing to address the board, and you may have, I've seen some policies that say a board meeting can't continue after 11 o'clock or 11:30 or midnight. And if you're approaching that hour, you can recess the meeting. And if you recess it more than 36 hours, it has to be reposted. Like you're reposting a special meeting. If it's recessed then less than 36 hours, so you have it 24 hours the next day, that does not have to be reposted. But certainly you'd want to get the message out there as far as when that new meeting is being recessed. Or when that meeting is being reconvened, and then you would pick up public comment from that point. But you want to make sure that you have a quorum available, to reconvene that meeting.
So we've got a number of questions that have popped up, Brad. So here's one. Currently, our public comment is required in writing because their meetings are still being held virtually. Is that okay?
Well, yeah, if you're holding a meeting virtually, that means you're currently subject to a local state of emergency. Okay, so really, as the law stands right now, you can only have a virtual meeting in whole, meaning all board members are participating virtually, if you're under a local state of emergency, unless all your board members have a medical condition that prevent them from attending the meeting virtually. So yeah, if you're having a virtual meeting in whole subject to a state of emergency, then you're following Section 3A under the Open Meetings Act, which does allow you to receive public comment in writing during the meeting. And receiving public comment in writing under that section is a substitute for receiving public comment in real time virtually during that meeting.
Here's a question. When can you interrupt or gabble a speaker during public comment without infringing upon their First Amendment right?
Well, one is when they've exceeded the time limit. So if you adopted a rule that sets individual time limit at 3 minutes, you gavel the person down. Another situation would be if they're addressing something that is outside the scope of the Board of Education. Okay. I mentioned your board meetings are a limited public forum. That means you're only required to hear issues, complaints, comments relating to matters that are within your jurisdiction as a Board of Education. So if someone goes outside of that and starts rambling on about their next door neighbor burning leaves, you can gavel the person down and say that outside the board's jurisdiction, take up that matter with your township board and not the school board. Those are two of the main situations. Now, if someone's speech starts breaching the peace of the meeting, that, you could gavel that person down as well. That's the standard that's under the Open Meetings Act, is that someone has a right to attend a meeting up until their conduct results in a breach of peace at that meeting. And if someone's speech constitutes a breach of peace, so the cell may be protected speech, but if it's breaching the peace of the meeting by creating an uproar, an uprising that is preventing the board from conducting its business, that's a time when you could gavel that person down as well.
So Brad, along those lines, if you have a member that goes over your time limit, you gavel them down, they won't stop talking. Like, I know I've talked to some districts are like, well, I shut off the mic, but they still talk. So what, is there a recourse in that space?
Yeah, at that point, the person is breaching the peace of the meeting. So a clear violation of a rule that is disrupting the meeting constitutes a breach of peace of that meeting. In that case, if you don't have a liaison officer present, you may want to contact law enforcement to have that person removed from the meeting.
All right. You kind of addressed this. They refer to the state board meeting of last week where they did 3 hours of public comment. And then, they ended it with 20 people left. You mentioned having a policy that says meetings won't go beyond a certain point. If you don't have a policy about the length of a meeting or when meetings will end, can you still recess a meeting and say, we're going to return to public comment in tomorrow or the next day or something along, or do you have to have a policy?
No, don't have to have a policy. You could have, at some point as a board, if you've been in a meeting for 4 or 5 hours and you're approaching midnight, and even if you don't have a policy indicating that you can't have a meeting after midnight, someone can make a motion to recess. That is a majority vote. If a majority of the board votes to recess the meeting, then it's recessed. And within that motion, you may want, it could be amended to include when the meeting would be reconvened as well. So you want to be somewhat specific as far as when you would plan to reconvene that meeting. Now, if it's not going to be within 36 hours, you probably don't have to put the time when it's going to be reconvened within the motion, because you would, under the Open Meetings Act, you would be required to provide additional notice of that reconvened meeting.
All right. Can a board have a policy that says comments will be limited from 3 to 5 minutes? And then if you have a larger crowd, you narrow it to 3 minutes. If it's a smaller crowd, you stay up at the 5 minutes.
Yes, you may. Again, that would be at the discretion of the board president. Ideally, you would like to put a number on that, saying that, if we have more than 20 people wishing to address the board, we're going to reduce public comment to 3 minutes from 5 minutes. But as long as you make that decision ahead of time and that authority is clear in the adopted policy or bylaw, who makes that decision, that would be acceptable. Yes.
If you're streaming a board meeting, but the board is there in person, it's open to the public in person, do you have to give people that are watching via streaming an opportunity to comment, or can that be limited to those that are attending in person? Yeah,
I think it's the best practice. You require folks to be in person, because when you're streaming a meeting, you're not following Section 3A of the Open Meetings Act. You're not holding a virtual meeting in whole or in part. So we really don't know, what you would set as possible parameters for virtual public comment in that space, because you're not following Section 3A. So in that case, I would say require folks to be present to address the board if you're having a traditional in-person meeting and you're streaming it one way to the community.
Would you recommend in the posting that they actually say this meeting will be streamed, but all public comment must be offered in person, so that people are aware that they're doing it that way?
I think that would be a good idea. Yep.
Okay. Can you give an example of breach of peace? Is it someone who is starting to yell and get aggressive? Or like what do you think would constitute that space?
So there was a recent court case, I want to say about 1.5 years ago. And what happened in this case, you had a member of the community who was bringing litigation against this particular public board based upon a board member who was accused of committing a federal crime. And this community member wanted this individual removed from the board, and it wasn't getting done. So he brought suit against the township board to force removal. Now, different rules apply to township boards, so not getting into the issue of removing a board member from the school board. But at this meeting, the chair of the community recognized that this individual was in the audience, indicated, thanks to Mr. Jones, now we have to spend another $50,000 on legal fees. And then the individual gets up from his chair and says, now, wait a minute, let me explain myself. And the chair told this person to sit back down. And as the person was going back to his chair, he said, I just wish this board would follow the law, or something along those lines. Based on that comment, the chair had him removed from the meeting for breaching the peace of that meeting. So obviously, in that case, the court determined that was not a breach of peace of the meeting. Okay, that was a chair who was just trying to express authority beyond authority that chair had, and violated the rights of that individual, because that individual, was talking out of turn, not during public comment, but clearly wasn't breaching the peace of the meeting. So in order to breach the peace of the meeting, you really have to use language that would, create an uproar, would be categorized as fighting words, so to speak. Now, throwing things is certainly a breach of the peace of the meeting. I know about 10 years ago, we had an individual who was, throwing fruit at board members, and that constituted a breach of peace at that particular meeting, and that person was removed. So it is really almost conduct that goes beyond the realm of reasonableness. Okay, you have to look at someone's conduct, and they are completely acting unreasonable, irrational, and are disrupting the board from pursuing, taking care of its business at a public meeting.
So along those lines, Brad, and probably less in the breach of the peace, but we have seen districts that just because of the sheer volume that's coming out of the audience, right? They've finished public comment and people just are out in the audience talking. Maybe they're still shouting when the board tries to do something, and a board is just like unable to conduct its business because it's too loud in the room. Like, how does a board handle that disruption? Is it at that point, if you get kind of going back to your example, do you have a liaison officer or law enforcement to quiet them down? Like, if you say, please, you gavel them and say, we need decorum in the audience. I watched it in the legislature for years when, when that stuff would come up. Like, is that the only recourse that you have?
Yeah, again, I'm going to recommend using recess as a tool. But in that case, you recess it maybe for 10 minutes and call in any type of law enforcement assistant that you may have access to. If you have a liaison officer, that person may be able to assist. Hopefully you could get some other law enforcement support for that person. But you would recess the meeting and you would inform the individuals we're going to recess until folks follow our rules of decorum and allow us to conduct a business meeting. We're not, it's difficult for the board to follow through with its business with this type of behavior, with this type of disruption, and we're not going to try to do it. So again, I would recess. In that case, maybe recess for 15 minutes. Hopefully when you come back, you won't have it. But if you come back, reconvene, you still have it, maybe recess one more time. And then, after 3 times, you might want to just say, okay, we're recessing, definitely until we reconvene the meeting, whether it's within 36 hours or after that.
Okay, we're continue to have more questions for Brad, so we're moving away from being able to share, but I feel that you all want to hear answers to these because this is part of what you have to deal with in your meetings. So I would say if you want to share something about how you handled CRT in your district and something that worked for you, whether it be, hey, we did this handout or this is how we address the issue, throw that in the chat so people can read it too. And I will also, as I said, continue to go through these. can a district decide to say they have a 3-minute limit for each individual speaker, and the crowd says, hey, we'll defer our time to this speaker so they can have 15 minutes to speak. Do you recommend going down that road, or do you recommend leaving it at an individual speaker?
I don't recommend allowing the sharing of time. Nowhere in the Open Meetings Act does it say someone can, share time with another individual. You want to, enforce your rules consistently that only, individuals have 3 minutes. You, as an individual, if you're giving someone else's time, you still have 3 minutes. 3 minutes is the limit, or 5 minutes, whatever you've adopted. You only get one bite of the apple.
Some boards have typically at the end of the meeting a time for individual school board member comment.
Mm-hmm.
And the question, can a district through procedures or policy set time limits on the amount of time that board members get to do their public comment to the board?
Well, Don, I'm not sure your feelings on individual board member comment, but I'm not a big fan of it. I would prefer that that not be part of the agenda. But if it is, I think it would be reasonable to put a limitation on that as well.
Yeah, I tend to fall into the same place. I mean, clearly there might be, during normal agenda items, board members have the opportunity for give and take. What you don't want to get caught up in is public comment period is for the public to come in and comment. And we always recommend that you don't get into a back and forth with the public during that. And so if you adhere to that rule, and then later in the meeting, a board member decides to take their time to, in essence, respond to the public outside of what the board's messaging is, you do create a kind of a relationship dynamic with that board, within your board that can be problematic. So I think you do want to have procedures in place that say that comments need to be germane to a specific situation or an agenda item. And I think having a limitation makes sense as well. Otherwise, you could also have extend the meeting for a long period of time, even amongst board members. Along those lines, a follow-up question that kind of goes with that is, can a board member address the board as a community member? So in essence, step away from the board table during a public comment period.
Well, as a board member, you wear your board member hat 24/7. You never take that board member hat off until you resign from the board. So even though you say you're speaking as a community member, now you're speaking as a board member when you would get up from your seat and address the board. Now, this hasn't been addressed technically by a court, but a court did address this issue in dicta in an opinion. And in that dicta, it had reservations about whether a board member really could participate in public comment on the same level as community members participating in public comment. So I don't think it would be unreasonable for a board, if it wished to, adopt a rules limiting public comment, just to community members who don't serve or to all members of the public who don't serve on that specific school board.
Well, and I will add, I mean, you've all seen it, and maybe you haven't all, and you're fortunate. I can remember at a time sitting on my school board and maybe not while personally attacked in name, definitely being attacked as a board. And for me, and my staff would attest to this, for me to sit by and not be able to respond to that kind of attack was probably the hardest thing that I've ever done as a board member. I wanted to respond. I wanted to give my side of the allegations that were being made. And of course, at our board, our board president and our superintendent, would take the public comment and maybe make a clarifying statement at times. But the rest of us, that was not our role. And I know how difficult that is. But it is something that I think once you go down that road of engaging in that back and forth, it's very hard to keep civility and decorum in that space. And as a board, I think that's ultimately the space that you have to hold. Like, you are the example to your community of how a meeting is conducted, and you don't want to wade into that space. So I know that's a tough space, but.
Hey, Don, and before we go on to our next question, I wanted to quickly go back to the breach of peace question. And
Yep.
I did dig up a pretty good definition of where the courts have arrived on that term. And this goes back to that actual court case I was using as an example. And courts have essentially arrived that it constitutes seriously disruptive conduct involving abusive, disorderly, dangerous, aggressive, or provocative speech and behaviors tending to threaten or incite violence. So these cases that have looked at the issue go well beyond, breach of peace goes well beyond acceptable behavior. So that's kind of how courts look at it.
And I'll jump to a question a little further down. Can you limit or cut off a person if they make a personal attack on an individual board member?
So again, you have to distinguish between what is a personal attack and what is a complaint relating to the board member's duties and responsibilities. If someone attacks a board member completely unrelated to the board member's duties and responsibilities, yes, again, because you're under a limited public forum, you don't have to hear that. It's not within the jurisdiction of the board, in my opinion, if that's a personal attack unrelated to the individual serving on the board. But if it's attack against or a complaint against a board member about how he or she voted on something, or a comment that board member made, or maybe if it's even a social media comment that is tied to the school district and related to the Board of Education, that would be something that would have to be allowed as well.
All right. Do you believe an individual that during public comment time can be allowed to play a recorded message over their phone that somebody else is speaking as opposed to they speaking individually?
Sometimes it's impossible to adopt a rule that's going to address every situation. And, that's a kind of an unusual situation. I would say, as long as it's within the 3 minutes and it's just that one person, but again, you could have someone set up a system where someone submits all these recordings and then you're hearing nothing but recordings at a public meeting being held up by different individuals. So I have no idea whether a court would say that adopting a rule where it states that you have to be the person addressing the board and you can't be sharing a recording is a legitimate rule under the Open Meetings Act, under the First Amendment. I would hope that a court would say that, but I can't guarantee it. That's just a very unique type of situation, unique issue.
For open comment period, if there are people that reside out of your district, does it matter, or do they have the same right as anybody else to address the board?
Same right as everybody else.
That's what I thought. And a good question, Deb Macon. Any tips on how board members can personally prepare for the possible stress that may result from contentious meetings? I'm going to tip my hand a little bit. My intro article for the upcoming Leaderboard magazine kind of gets into this space, at least as one of my comments. And I do think it's really important. Self-care is a big deal. We've heard about that for our teachers. We've heard about it for our students during this time of the pandemic and virtual learning. Clearly, there is a lot of stress for superintendents and board members, whether it be on this space or masking or whatever controversial topic that you might have before your district. And what I would encourage is, hopefully being a school board member is not the end all and be all that defines you. You should have family, you should have hobbies, you should have other things that you should have, hopefully exercise, things that you use in the normal course of life to de-stress. When your kids drive you nuts, your spouse drives you nuts, whoever it is, what do you do to try to step away from it? And I think in the environment that we're in right now for school board members and SUPs, it's more important now than any other time to figure out what that is. Or I do think, and I've had board members said, I don't know how much longer I can take this. And I have great empathy for the positions that you're in. but you do need to find that way to, how do you step away? Being a board member, while I'm so, proud of all of you for the work that you do and what you give up to your communities. You need to hold a piece of yourself back. It is not who you, it is a part of who you are, but it is not who you are. And don't, in most cases, I would say, don't view the comments from the public as a direct attack on you. It is a much broader than that. In some cases, it's kind of a national scope to drive a wedge or to undermine local boards. Don't, and it's hard to say, don't take it personally when you are very personally engaged in this work for kids. But that at least is an advice space to try to separate and practice self-care. Let's see. There was an OMA question. If a district is having an in-person meeting, but they've decided also can via Zoom so that people are able to participate via Zoom, just like they did during the pandemic and in person, is that still meeting the requirements of OMA, or can they not have the Zoom participation and part of the meeting?
Well, that's one of the reasons why I would advise against this. I don't know. I really don't know whether allowing someone to do it. I'm assuming it would comply with the Open Meetings Act, but the Open Meetings Act only addresses virtual public comment in the context of when the board is meeting virtually, whether it be in part or in whole. So yeah, I really don't know whether that would be OMA compliant, by allowing someone to carry out their right of addressing the board virtually when a board is not having a virtual meeting in whole or in part.
Let's see. Are there limits on placing on the agenda the presentation of a controversial topic by a non-school district group, for example, CRT?
Well, you go to your policies on that one. Every board should have a policy of placing items on the agenda. Most of the policies or bylaws that I have read indicate a request from a community member goes through the superintendent and board president. And it's up to those individuals in consultation to determine whether that should be placed on the agenda. Now, I'm a proponent of saying community members have their right to address the board during public comment. So I think it would have to be a very, very unique circumstance situation, to put a community member on the agenda to address an issue with the board, because they do have the right under OMA to go through public comment.
We're coming up on our time, Brad. One district, Chelsea actually shared in the kind of how they're trying to handle this. And I actually have conversations with that district. So in their case, they created a special subcommittee on this topic, where they are also holding meetings and giving an opportunity to hear views and gather information to kind of remove it from the board meeting itself and use it as an information gathering space and deciding, what the board is going to do over time. And they're, right, sharing that as something that, maybe has helped to kind of defer it to a different place than in the hot, in the heat of a board meeting or taking away from the agenda of a board meeting.
Yeah. And I think I may have even talked with Chelsea about that. And they're not, structuring those as, those committees having any authority. And I believe it's, separate, if I'm recalling the situation that they're using, it's separate individual board members meeting with community members, kind of like a teacher parent conference, when they have it set up where you're meeting with individual teachers and you're going from table to table to talk about your child. I believe that's how they set this up, if I recall our conversation correctly.
I see Greg Newland from I'm blanking on the district right now, but talks about bad acts. Sorry. is taking, sharing the opportunity as far as the protocols for addressing the board. They actually put that right in the agenda so that people understand how that works. So it doesn't have to be addressed by the board president at the beginning. It just says, here's what's going to happen with public comment. They also put it on their website, and he says that was helpful at that time. So that would be an example. I've talked to some other districts on the kind of CRT space. Some have had it really well. They've had, one board meeting, they've had some people come in and speak. The board and or superintendent have addressed it, said we're not doing it. And that was the end of the controversy for them. Of course, we'd have others where this has been meeting after meeting, even though the board has said we're not doing this, where it has continued. And I saw somebody comment earlier about the past year have been being exhausting, and there is no doubt. I can't, because I've been there for a short period of time, I kind of can imagine, but I also understand. I was talking to the Detroit News yesterday and said, Brad and I have both been around 24 years, and we've never seen anything like this. This is, the controversy after controversy. It's not even the pandemic, it's all of the things surrounding that, and then add CRT. Boards, you are doing, the strength that you are showing in trying to help continue to govern your districts is second to none. I look at the legislature and only wish that they had the modicum of the kind of civility that you have in the governance space, and are approaching things. And it's not a political statement, RRD. It is, I think boards are trying to do a tremendous job of not having infighting, trying to let the public have comment and listen to them as community members. And I surely hope that this gets better for boards over time. I don't want to be the downer, but I do share with my colleagues regularly across the country. I will say that, one, you're not alone in this. This is not a Michigan thing. This is everywhere. But I will also share with you, depending on where they are, it's actually much more escalated in some of those states. And I hope that we don't reach those places in Michigan, but it's buses going from district to district with people from outside your district coming in to testify during public comment period. It is, political action committees being formed to select people to run against school board members. I just saw something on Facebook. Jay Cutler, the former quarterback of Chicago Bears. See, Stacy Bogard. This is why you shouldn't be a fan of the Chicago Bears. He lives in Tennessee now, and based on these conversations, has now talked about he's looking to run for the school board, and he's looking to collect signatures. He's already posted he needs 100 signatures, and he's posting clips on Twitter about pictures of the board and saying I need to run against them for a board that's trying to do the right thing in that situation too. So this is it is becoming a big issue, and I just hope that we can keep that, the money and the PACs and other things out of this space in Michigan. I know we've seen some county political parties do training on how to run for a school board. We do not want partisanship in school board races. And in fact, we were contacted by a political party to ask MASB if we would, do a how to run for school board and other things for their county party. And we directed them to our website where we have things about our Get On Board campaign. It is not a place that we want to, as a 501c3 nonprofit, want to get into. And frankly, we just don't believe it's a place for MASB to be being involved in that partisan space, because we don't believe that even if some members and some of you may be a part of it, that it's always altruistic motives. There's a political bent, and I'm okay with that. But MASB is not okay with being a participant in that space. But we are seeing a little bit of that in Michigan. And in my 24 years, I've been very proud of school board members that all have their partisan views and they keep them to themselves and they govern in the best interest of kids. And it's rare that the R&D even comes up in a conversation, although we're seeing a little bit more of that. So keep doing the good work that you're doing. Brad, do you have were you going to make a comment? I saw.
Yeah,
you kind
one
of-
final comment. I've been commenting on, adopting bylaws and ensuring that your public comment rules are recorded and approved in policy. One other policy point I wanted to make is, addressing the CRT issue with policy. You adopt these policy manuals that are like, this thick, you adopt them for a reason. And this is, one of the reasons you would adopt a policy. And if you're a Neola client, look at policy 2240, controversial issues in the classroom. I think based upon the type of, coverage that CRC has received, the type of number of folks that are coming to board meetings to address the issue, I think it can fairly be categorized as a controversial issue. And if you're a Neola client, you have that policy and it sets standards for addressing controversial issues in the classroom. It has first a policy that sets broad standards and then an administrative guideline that ensures that your administration is involved in any type of controversial issue that's going to be discussed in the classroom. So you have addressed it by policy. That would be a good response, to any claim saying that this, the board adopts policies to address these type of matters, and we have a policy on controversial issues in the classroom.
Thank you, Brad. Hey, we're 4 minutes after 1. I'm sorry that we didn't get to give you time back and forth. As I said earlier, as the questions kept flowing, I thought it was important that you get those questions addressed. The meeting management side of this is important. As you have suggestions throughout the course of the next couple of weeks or this fall, share them directly with me, send them to me at my email address, dwatruba@masb.org, or go to our website and find me. We want to continue to provide you resources that will help you as you take on controversial issues and other things. And I'm best informed when you tell me what you need as local board members. So please share that. Really appreciate when you share that. As always, you can contact Brad on legal and clarifying questions. But again, thank you very much. Thank you for what you're doing. I hope that this hour was helpful. And clearly this won't be the last thing we do on this topic, as long as board members and soups keep saying we need assistance in this space. So best of luck as all of you get back to a regular school year this year. Hopefully we can keep all of our kids in school going forward, and they get to return to some sense of normalcy as they move back into school this fall. So thank you all very much, and have a great week.